When Miguel finally reached the colt, he placed his hand on its chestnut coat, feeling the warmth pulsate as if it were the very heartbeat of the world. At that moment, he discovered that behind the ancient oak tree lay not a lifeless body, but a wounded, unconscious man who would forever change the destiny of the ranch and everyone who lived there. 3 weeks before that golden dawn, Miguel had woken to the familiar sound of hooves beating against the stable planks. At 12 years old, the slender boy, his hair tousled by the wind, knew every whinny, every sigh of the horses that populated Golden Fields Ranch. But that September morning, something was different. A new sound echoed between the stalls, a young whinny full of life and restlessness. "He was born at dawn," explained Joachim, the foreman, as Miguel approached the stall where a chestnut mare gently nuzzled her newborn colt. "I've never seen such a spirited animal. He was on his feet in minutes, as if he were in a hurry to see the world." Miguel's eyes lit up as he watched the little colt. There was something special about the animal, a light in its eyes that seemed to reflect the boy's own soul. Since losing his parents in a car accident 2 years earlier, Miguel had lived with his Aunt Rose on the ranch, helping with the chores and finding solace in the company of the animals. They seemed to understand her silent grief in a way that adults never could. "You need to stop this obsession with the colt," Aunt Rose said that night as they ate a simple dinner of beans and rice. "Colonel Montenegro has already said he's going to sell him next week." The words hit Miguel like a punch to the stomach. A week. He only had a week to figure out what Liberty was trying to tell him, to understand the mysterious connection that bound them. "Aunt Rose, have you ever seen an animal act like Liberty acts?" Miguel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Rose sighed, placing her spoon on the table. "Miguel, my boy, I know you miss your parents. I know you're looking for meaning in places where there may be none. But sometimes an animal is just an animal." But Miguel knew his aunt was wrong. Liberty was more than an animal. He was a symbol, a manifestation of something he couldn't yet name, but that he felt pulsing in his chest like a second heart. The following night, Miguel couldn't sleep. He got up quietly and walked to the stable, where he found Liberty awake, as if waiting for him. The colt's eyes shone in the twilight, reflecting the pale light of the waning moon. "Can't you sleep either?" Miguel whispered, stroking the animal's nose. "I keep thinking about Anna and her family. It's not fair what they're going to do to them." Liberty whinnied softly, a sound that seemed more like conversation than animal noise. Miguel sat on the stall floor, leaning his back against the wooden wall. "You know, sometimes I wonder if my parents can see me from wherever they are," the boy continued, his voice choked with emotion. "I wish they could tell me what to do, how to be brave when everything seems impossible." That's when Miguel noticed something extraordinary. As he spoke, Liberty had approached and was now lying down beside him, his muzzle resting on his knee. The physical contact conveyed a sense of peace that Miguel hadn't felt in a long time. "You understand, don't you?" the boy murmured. "You've also lost something important." At that moment, Miguel understood that Liberty wasn't just a colt separated from his mother. He was a free spirit, trapped by the conventions of a world that only valued what could be bought and sold. And that understanding awakened in him a determination he didn't know he possessed. The next 3 days were a roller coaster of emotions. Miguel divided his time between ranch chores and a secret investigation into Montenegro's plans. Using his ability to move unnoticed, he discovered that the situation was worse than he had imagined. The man in the dark suit was a real estate speculator, who had identified in the region a potential for urban development. His plan was to buy all the small rural properties, displace the traditional families, and transform the area into a luxury condominium. The neighboring ranch was only the first step in a much larger project. "That's how the world works," he overheard Montenegro say in a phone conversation. "The weak give way to the strong. There's no sentimentality in business." Miguel felt a burning anger flare in his chest. How could they talk about families as if they were disposable obstacles? How could they reduce entire lives to numbers on a spreadsheet? It was that night that he made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't stop Montenegro's plans alone, but perhaps he could do something more symbolic, something that would touch people's hearts and make them question what was happening. The next morning, Miguel arrived at the stable before sunrise. Liberty was restless, as if sensing that something important was about to happen. The boy checked that no one was around and opened the stall door. "It's time, my friend," he whispered, stroking the colt's neck. "You've always wanted to be free. Today is your day." Liberty looked at Miguel with an intensity that seemed almost human. For a moment, the boy had the impression that the animal understood exactly what was being proposed. Then, with a soft whinny, the colt stepped out of the stall and walked toward the open field. What happened next was pure magic. Liberty began to run, but not in the chaotic way the ranch hands expected. His movements were calculated, elegant, as if performing an ancestral dance. The colt galloped toward the sunrise, his silhouette cut against the orange sky, creating an image of such intense beauty that even the roughest men stopped to gaze. Miguel ran after him, not to capture the animal, but to be a part of that extraordinary moment. His feet touched the grass lightly, and for an instant he felt as free as the colt he was following. The workers' reaction was immediate and predictable. Some laughed, others mocked the boy's useless chase after the animal. But Miguel didn't care about the taunts. He had a greater purpose, a mission that transcended appearances. "Look at the dreamy kid," one of the cowboys yelled, "chasing after a colt he'll never catch." But as Miguel approached Liberty, the laughter subsided. There was something about the boy's determination, the fluidity of his movements, that transformed the apparent game into something deeper. And when Liberty finally stopped near the ancient bush marking the boundary between the properties, Miguel reached out and gently touched the animal's muzzle. "I knew you'd wait for me," he murmured, and the colt responded with a low whinny that sounded almost like a sigh of contentment. That's when Miguel saw what was behind the bush. It wasn't the lifeless body his imagination had conjured, but something equally impactful. A wounded and unconscious man, dressed in simple farmhand clothes. "Help! Someone's hurt here!" Miguel shouted, his voice echoing across the fields. The workers ran toward the boy, their mocking expressions replaced by genuine concern. Joachim arrived first, breathless, and stopped abruptly at the sight of the fallen man. "I know that face," the foreman murmured, kneeling beside the injured man. "It's Jose Pereira from the neighboring ranch. He disappeared 3 days ago." A shiver ran down Miguel's spine. Jose Pereira was the unofficial leader of the rural community threatened by Montenegro's plans. His absence had left the families even more vulnerable and fearful. "He's alive," Pedro announced, checking the man's pulse. "But he needs urgent medical attention." While the men organized the rescue, Miguel remained beside Liberty, stroking the colt's neck. He was beginning to understand that this hadn't been a coincidence. Somehow, the animal knew where Jose was and had guided Miguel to him. The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. Jose Pereira was taken to the town hospital, where doctors discovered he'd had an accident. He'd fallen from a tree while trying to retrieve a runaway calf, hitting his head on a rock. With no obvious external injuries, he'd remained unconscious for 3 days, surviving only thanks to the shade of the bush and the morning dew. But Jose's discovery brought up questions that went far beyond the accident. Why was he near the boundary between the ranches? Why hadn't anyone searched that specific area during the 3-day search? Miguel found some answers when he overheard a conversation between Joaquim and Pedro. Jose was investigating the strange movements on the boundary, Pedro said in a low voice. He suspected someone was altering the property markers, preparing to claim land that doesn't belong to them. "And do you think the accident was really an accident?" Joaquim asked. "I don't know, but it's a very convenient coincidence, isn't it?" A chill went down Miguel's spine. If Jose was investigating irregularities in the land demarcation, his prolonged absence directly benefited Montenegro's plans. And if it weren't for liberty? That afternoon, while Jose recovered in the hospital, Miguel visited the neighboring ranch. He wanted to see Ana and check on her family. What he found was a scene of worry and uncertainty. "Without Jose to guide us, we don't know what to do," Ana's father explained, a man with calloused hands and weary eyes. "He was the only one who understood documents and laws. Now we're lost." Ana, a girl with brown hair and intelligent eyes, pulled Miguel aside. "Do you think it was really an accident?" she asked, her voice laden with a worry that shouldn't exist in someone her age. Miguel hesitated. He had no proof, only suspicions and an intuition that grew in his chest like a stubborn flame. "I don't know," he finally replied. "But if it wasn't, we need to do something. What can 2 kids do against powerful men?" The question echoed in Miguel's mind all the way back to the ranch. What could he really do? He was just a 12-year-old boy with no money, no influence, no power. But as he walked, he saw Liberty grazing freely in the field, and something inside him ignited. That night, Miguel couldn't sleep. He thought about Jose, about Ana, about the families who could be driven from their land. He also thought about Liberty, who was to be sold the following week, separated from his mother and taken far from everything he knew. It was as if there was a cruel pattern in the world, the weak being subjugated by the strong, the innocent paying the price of others' greed. But Miguel couldn't accept that, not when he had seen the strength that existed in the purity, in the courage of a young colt who had guided a boy to the truth. That's when he had an idea. The next morning, Miguel woke with the first rays of sun. He dressed quickly and ran to the stable, where he found Liberty awake, as if waiting for him. The colt's eyes shone with an intensity that seemed to reflect the boy's own thoughts. "Do you trust me?" whispered, stroking the animal's muzzle. Liberty whinnied softly, a sound Miguel had learned to interpret as approval. The boy smiled and opened the stall door. "Then let's show everyone that freedom isn't something you can buy or sell." What happened next would become legend in the region. Miguel rode Liberty, something he'd never done before, and together they began to traverse the ranch's fields. But it wasn't an ordinary ride. Miguel had memorized the exact location of each boundary marker, each point where the properties met. As they rode, the boy carefully examined the land, searching for signs that the boundary markers had been altered. What he discovered confirmed his worst suspicions. Several stone markers had been moved, some by meters, others by centimeters. Subtle alterations that, when combined, transferred a considerable area of the neighboring farm to Montenegro's property. "We found it, my friend," whispered, dismounting near a marker that had clearly been repositioned. "Now we need to prove it." Miguel knew that discovering the fraud wasn't enough. He needed irrefutable evidence. Using an old Polaroid camera he'd found in the attic, he began systematically documenting each irregularity. Liberty accompanied him patiently, as if understanding the importance of the mission. But as they worked, Miguel realized they weren't alone. Joaquim approached on horseback, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Miguel, what are you doing?"
the foreman asked, dismounting near the boy. Miguel hesitated. Joaquim had always been kind to him, but he was Montenegro's employee. Would it be risky to trust him? But looking into the man's eyes, the boy saw something that reassured him, a genuine kindness that transcended professional loyalty. "Joaquim, you're a good man," Miguel said, his voice firm despite his young age. The foreman sighed deeply. "What did you discover, boy?" Over the next hour, Miguel showed Joaquim all the evidence he had collected. The man watched in silence, his expression growing darker as he understood the extent of the fraud. "This is very serious," finally murmured. "If these accusations are true—" "They are true," Miguel interrupted. "And José Pereira suspected something. That's why he was investigating the boundary when he had the accident." Joaquim looked at Miguel with an expression of surprise and respect. "You're only 12 years old, but you see things that many adults prefer to ignore. Sometimes you need a child's eyes to see what's really important," Miguel replied, stroking Liberty's neck. That afternoon, Joaquim made a decision that would change his life.
He sought out Montenegro in his office, carrying the photographs Miguel had taken. The conversation was tense, full of accusations and denials, but the foreman remained firm. "Colonel, I've worked for you for 15 years, Joaquim said, his voice calm but determined. "I've always been loyal, always followed orders, but I can't be complicit in a fraud." Montenegro tried to argue, offer financial incentives, even threaten Joaquim's job, but the foreman had made up his mind. "You have 24 hours to correct the markers and cancel the land grab plans," he said, rising to leave. "Otherwise, these photographs will be given to the authorities." The tension on the ranch over the next few hours was palpable. Montenegro gathered his allies, trying to find a way to circumvent the situation, but the evidence was irrefutable, and he knew there was no escaping the legal consequences if the case went to court. Miguel, meanwhile, remained close to Liberty, as if the colt were his source of strength and tranquility. He knew he had set off a chain of events that could have unpredictable consequences. "Do you think we did the right thing?" he asked the animal, which whinnied softly in response. That's when Aunt Rose approached, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. "Miguel, I know what you did," she said, sitting beside her nephew. "You were very brave, but also very reckless. Messing with powerful men can have serious consequences. And if we do nothing, the families of the neighboring farm will lose their land," Miguel replied. "Sometimes you have to take risks for others." Rose smiled, a look of maternal pride shining in her eyes. "You've grown up so much, my boy. Your parents would be proud." The resolution came unexpectedly. Montenegro, realizing he couldn't escape the consequences, made a surprising decision. Instead of fighting the evidence, he decided to turn the situation into an opportunity for redemption. That night, he called a meeting with all the ranch workers. Miguel was present, alongside Joaquim, observing the man he had until then considered an insurmountable adversary. "I made mistakes," Montenegro said, his voice filled with an emotion no one expected to hear. "I let greed blind me, let the desire for profit make me lose sight of what truly matters." He explained that he would cancel all plans to seize land, that the markers would be repositioned to their original places, and that he would offer compensation to the affected families. "But more important than that," he continued, looking directly at Miguel, "I learned a valuable lesson from a 12-year-old boy. I learned that true strength doesn't come from power or money, but from the courage to do what's right, even when it seems impossible." In the following days, the ranch transformed. The tense atmosphere was replaced by one of cooperation and hope. José Pereira fully recovered and returned to lead his community, now with the unexpected support of Montenegro, who became an ally in the fight for the rights of rural families. But the greatest transformation happened with Liberty. Montenegro, in a symbolic gesture, decided that the colt would not be sold. Instead, he would remain on the ranch, free to run through the fields as he wished, representing the freedom they had all achieved. "Some animals are born to be free," Montenegro said to Miguel, watching the colt gallop across the golden field. "And some boys are born to teach us what freedom truly means." Months passed, and life on the ranch found a new balance. Miguel continued to visit Liberty every day, but now it was no longer a moment of imminent farewell, but a celebration of a friendship that had transformed an entire community. Anna frequently visited him, and together they rode through the fields, exploring every corner of the region they had almost lost. Joaquim was promoted to ranch manager, and his compassionate leadership created a work environment where everyone felt valued. "You know what I learned from all this?" Miguel said to Anna as they watched Liberty run freely through the field. "That courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid." Anna smiled, her eyes shining with a wisdom beyond her years. "And I learned that sometimes the answers we seek are closer than we imagine. We just need the courage to look for them." If you're following this story and have been touched by Miguel and Liberty's journey, consider subscribing to our channel for more stories like this, celebrating the courage, compassion, and transformative power within each of us.